Hello again. This is another lesson in cultural geography. We are going to continue talking about urbanization and the hearths of urbanization, but also the industrialized hearths, or the hearths of industrialization. Okay, so by now I hope you followed my prompts in the video prior to this and you did an examination of those early hearths of urbanization for the first urban revolution through and agriculture, those agricultural hearths. Look at that overlap, please, because there are, major urban and agricultural hearths like the Indus River Valley, Mesoamerica, Peru, Mesopotamia, all of these different locations on Earth, because they were central to shipping, central to fertile land, central to being able to achieve agriculture without advanced technology that began with the Industrial Revolution. And even though you've seen some of the pictures from the Second Agricultural Revolution that we had a few weeks back, some of the pictures from that website that I showed, those machines being pulled behind an ox or a couple of horses or something were pretty darn simplistic, and they don't look like they are huge technological advancements to you and me, because we have a whole lot of history behind us and we know what a combine looks like. But this was revolutionary, and that's why we use the word revolution, in, making food security happen and making surplus happen, bringing down the death rate, stabilizing birth rates, making population go up in that third stage of the demographic transition model. Okay, but we know that there's more to it than just birth and death rates to increase the population. Migration happens to be a very significant factor in populations increasing. Okay, so urbanization has to do with city building, and there have to be resources for cities to provide to travelers and residents in order for them to become urban centers or industrial centers. So in the early urban hearths of the early urban revolution, you had economic, religious, and travel kind of functions in addition to residences that were available in those urban centers. But the primary reason they were happening was the agricultural function that it served. That doesn't mean that agriculture was happening within the urban center. It meant that that particular location was very convenient to what is called the hinterland. It is a word that I used in a previous lecture, but the hinterland is the outskirts, the peripheral land around that center, where all of the products that are part of the economy that supports the center and supports the entire area come from those areas toward that central location, that hearth. In the industry and services chapter, toward the end of the textbook, you will read about how ports and other transportation centers, not just those that were originally close to those agricultural hearths, became centers for industry and manufacturing, again because of the ease of transportation. So in that exchange triangle, that goods triangle that we looked at, I think it was in week 6, I showed you a map that where the goods and services and people in the slave trade were exchanged across the Atlantic Ocean. You saw things like luxury goods and textiles and furniture, and those kinds of items were listed on that map. And those kinds of things are manufactured in places, and in the early urbanization revolution, those things were manufactured in places where transportation was easy to happen. And so you see other things. It's not just people who work in manufacturing who flock to those urban centers and make them industrial hearths, because the people who work in manufacturing have children who need to be educated, they need entertainment, they have spiritual needs. There's all sorts of services too, like we need somebody to be a banker, be a doctor, be a lawyer, be real estate, all of this kind of stuff, government officials. All of these external pieces of division of labor also occur in this urbanization process. So we're back to another topic that my mind constantly goes to. You'll remember it from a previous lecture, from just the most immediate previous lecture: social stratification, social inequality. All of these different jobs called a division of labor that is created from that influx of people into the urban area and the diversity of jobs that occurred during the second agricultural revolution and the industrial revolution. The diversity of jobs comes from the fact that we don't have to have so many people involved in agricultural pursuits anymore, because food security is much more standardized across the board. We can expect to have food available for the number of people in the population. Thomas Malthus disagreed with that statement and gave his predictions, like the other population theorists that you looked at recently. However, go back to maybe it was week 2 or 3 when we were talking about agricultural density, population densities in general, but specifically agricultural density. The higher the number, the lower the number. What does that tell you about the number of people who have to work toward agriculture in order to support the food needs of a population? That's one of the things that you're investigating in Project 1, or you investigated in Project 1. But all of those, when those numbers fluctuate and you have a huge number of people in the population density and a much smaller number of people in the agricultural density, well, what are the rest of those people doing? They have peripheral jobs to that food getting strategy that not all of us have to focus on anymore. So you have that wide variety of jobs that do not have the same social value as the next. One job is not as desirable as the next, and therefore you see a whole lot of different ideas about who is upper class, who's middle, and who's lower class that comes into this industrialized world that we're transitioning into with these revolutions and with urbanization. So infrastructure is a big deal. If you have a lot of services and goods, paved streets, running water, proper sanitation, these kinds of things initially are in what we would call the high rent district in an urban area. And if you could afford to purchase a home or to rent a home or to live in a place that had these luxuries, and initially, yes, running water is considered a luxury. Still today, I mean, one of the push factors that you heard about in the video you watched about the Gateway of India, from the rural areas, so many people were migrating to Mumbai because of water resources, limited water resources, for instance, in their villages. So infrastructure is one of the major reasons why people are interested in urban areas. But if the infrastructure is not already in place in order to take care of the population that's flocking to these urban areas, then you have extreme poverty and not a whole lot of opportunity to sustain yourself, because what happened in the agricultural revolution, the second one, and the industrial revolution, you started removing people from that food getting activity, that food production activity. And so in their mental scape, they began not knowing how to produce their own food, or did not have the land space to produce the amount that they would need, and therefore you saw extreme poverty created in these kinds of situations. And so we're going to look at, again, the first world, second world, and third world problems that I referred to in a previous lecture. We're getting closer and closer to them. Text me with questions. Bye.